She poured her whole heart into raising him, gave him a name, a home, a future, and he paid her back by pushing her out the door like a stranger. It happened on a Thursday, deep into the afternoon, one of those heavy southern days when the sky can't decide whether to hold the sun or let it go early. Margaret stood on the front porch in her house slippers, holding a reusable grocery bag packed with a loaf of whole wheat bread, 2 cans of pinto beans, and a rotisserie chicken she just picked up from the store, still warm right through the plastic wrap. She pressed her hip against the door the way she always did, shifting the bag to one hand, and slid her key into the lock. It didn't turn. She tried again. Slow this time, deliberate, then fast. Then she pulled it out and flipped it over like maybe her hands were playing tricks on her. But her hands were fine. It was the lock that was wrong. Someone had replaced the deadbolt. She knocked. Once, twice, then harder, the heel of her fist firm against the wood of a door she had painted herself 14 years ago in a shade of green she picked out from a swatch at the hardware store because Leonard said it reminded him of the kudzu out back. She knocked, and she waited, still gripping that grocery bag, still wearing her soft blue cardigan that carried the faint, familiar smell of lavender fabric softener, still standing on the porch where she had stood for 22 years. The door cracked open. Jordan's girlfriend, Brittany, peered through the gap, her eyebrows lifted just slightly, like she'd been caught mid-thought. "Oh, hey, I didn't think you'd be back until later." Margaret blinked. "Why won't my key go in the door?" Brittany's eyes drifted back over her shoulder. Then she stepped out onto the porch and eased the door shut behind her. "I think Jordan was planning to talk to you about that." "Talk to me about what?" A small, careful pause. "You don't live here anymore." The silence that followed felt like something solid. Margaret held her grocery bag tighter, suddenly unsure where to put her hands, unsure what to do with the space between her and this woman standing on her porch. Her chest drew in tight. "What did you just say to me?" Brittany offered a thin, cautious smile, the kind people use when they want something uncomfortable to seem routine. "It's just paperwork stuff. Nothing personal. Jordan said you two had already worked it out. Said you agreed to sign the deed over." "I agreed to what?" "He mentioned you signed some documents a few weeks back. At the kitchen table, remember? He said it was all taken care of." And there it was. Something began to move in Margaret's memory, slow and cold like floodwater rising. The forms. The folder Jordan slid across the table with his easy, practiced calm. The way he waved off her questions. "Just housekeeping, mama. Just getting things in order so the house stays protected if anything ever happens to you." She hadn't put her reading glasses on. He had already highlighted the lines where she needed to sign. She trusted him. She had trusted her son. Her hands began to tremble, just slightly, at her sides. Brittany didn't wait around for more. She muttered something about calling Jordan, slipped back through the door, and the lock turned again from the inside. Margaret stood there. 1 minute, then 5, then 10. Nobody opened the door. She didn't knock again. She walked down those 3 porch steps, slow and careful, the chicken still tucked under her arm like something precious. She didn't know exactly where she was headed, but she knew she wasn't going back to beg. What Jordan had taken wasn't just a house. He had reached into something older and deeper than property lines, something that had no deed attached to it. And standing there at the bottom of those steps, something in Margaret began to wake up. She was about to remember, clearly and completely, exactly who she was. Long before any of this, before the paperwork, before Brittany, before her own front porch became unfamiliar ground, Margaret had been far more than a woman living in a house. She had been a mother, not by accident, not by biology, but by the kind of deliberate, bone-deep choice that most people aren't willing to make. Back in 1997, Margaret was working nights at St. Catherine's Medical Center in Jackson, Mississippi. She was a floor nurse. Steady, trusted, the kind of woman the younger staff came to when something went sideways because she didn't rattle easily. She had made peace, by then, with not having children of her own. 2 miscarriages. 1 round of fertility treatment that didn't take. The grief had long since settled into something she carried quietly, like a stone in her coat pocket. Heavy but hers. Then came Jordan. He'd been brought into the ER on a Tuesday night with a hairline fracture in his left wrist. Barely 2.5 years old. Underfed, wearing a t-shirt 4 sizes too large with a dried mustard stain on the front. The foster mother who dropped him off didn't stay. She handed him to the intake nurse and left. No explanation. No backward glance. Margaret wasn't looking to become anyone's mother that night. But life doesn't always announce itself before it arrives. Sometimes it just sets a child in your arms and waits to see what you do. Jordan didn't speak for the first few days. He just wrapped his small fingers into her scrubs and held on. Wouldn't eat from anyone else. Wouldn't let anyone else put him in the crib. There was something about her presence, her voice, her stillness, that told him he was somewhere safe. And for a child who hadn't had much of that, it was everything. 2 months later, Margaret filed the first set of adoption papers. 6 months after that, he had her last name. Her friends thought she'd lost her mind. A single black woman in her late 30s adopting a white toddler with documented behavioral challenges. Margaret, honey, you trying to rescue the whole foster care system by yourself? She'd shake her head. No, just this one. She gave Jordan the kind of childhood she'd always imagined giving a child. A bedroom with a race-car bed, she assembled herself on a Sunday afternoon with a borrowed toolkit and no instructions. Brown bag lunches with his name written on the side in permanent marker. Swimming lessons at the Y. Piano on Saturdays. Trips to the state zoo at least twice a year every year until he decided he was too old to enjoy it, and then she took him anyway. He had asthma. She researched pediatric pulmonologists until she found the best one within driving distance. He struggled with reading in the 2nd grade. She hired a tutor and sat with him 3 nights a week at the kitchen table with flashcards and patient repetition. She taught him to thread a needle so he could sew on his own buttons. She made him write thank you cards after every birthday and Christmas. She never missed a parent-teacher conference. Not one. But as the years passed, things shifted. By the time Jordan hit middle school, the questions started. Why do we look different? Why do people stare at us at the grocery store? Why does everybody already know I'm adopted? Margaret always answered the same way. Because you are. But that doesn't make you any less mine. He never fully sat with the answer. By high school, he had grown quiet and distant in the way teenagers do, pulling inward, spending more time in his room or with his friends than at the dinner table. By college, he barely came home. When he did, it was brief. An overnight stay, a quick dinner, a hey mama before his phone pulled him back out the door. Margaret never made him feel guilty for it. She kept his room the way he left it. She kept the lights on. She kept believing that love, offered without strings, was enough, even when it wasn't returned in kind. Then Leonard passed. A misdiagnosed blood clot 3 years ago, and the quiet house became quieter still. After the funeral, Jordan started coming around more. He cleaned the gutters, mowed the lawn without being asked, set reminders on her phone for her blood pressure medication. Sometimes he'd bring Brittany along, and the 4 of them, well, the 3 of them, would sit on the porch while Margaret made cornbread and watched the evening news. She thought something was healing. She thought the grief had opened a door between them that had been shut for years. What she didn't understand was that Jordan hadn't come home to reconnect. He came to take stock. By the time she understood what had actually happened, her name was gone from the deed, and the trust she had spent 3 decades building had been exchanged for nothing at all. But a mother's memory is long, and Margaret was remembering every single thing. That first night, Margaret slept in her car. She parked 2 blocks from the house, in front of a row of older duplexes with peeling window trim and plastic lawn chairs on the stoops. She didn't cry, not once, but her hands stayed locked on the steering wheel at 10 and too long after the engine was off, like her body hadn't yet received the message that she wasn't going anywhere. The rotisserie chicken sat cooling in the passenger seat, the plastic going slack, grease soaking into the bag. She stared through the windshield at nothing in particular. Grief has a particular weight when it isn't just about losing a person, but about recognizing who that person never truly was. When Leonard died, she thought that was the deepest pain she'd ever sit with. 29 years together. They'd met at church, fallen in love slowly over shared meals and long conversations, built a life that rested on something solid. His loss had been enormous. But this was a different kind of wound. Cleaner in a cold way. And somehow worse. The next morning, she drove to her bank branch and checked her accounts. It was habit as much as anything. Almost funny. She thought, how steady the numbers looked. Because Jordan had never once touched that money. He didn't even know it existed. After Leonard's death, the hospital where he'd been treated had insisted the complication was unforeseeable. A natural progression of an underlying condition. Margaret had spent 30 years as a nurse. She knew what a misdiagnosis looked like. She pressed the matter, filed formal complaints, and eventually connected with an attorney who took the case seriously. 2 years of patience, documentation, and quiet determination later, a malpractice settlement came through. $9.5 million. She never told Jordan. She never told anyone in the family. She moved every dollar into a separate trust filed under her maiden name, divided across several accounts. It wasn't secrecy for its own sake. It was discernment. She had watched money change people her whole life. Some things are safer when they stay quiet. Sitting in the bank lobby that morning, ankles swollen from sleeping cramped in her car, Margaret understood something she hadn't fully grasped before. Jordan hadn't just betrayed her. He had miscalculated. He assumed she was vulnerable because she was older, because she lived alone, because she hadn't pushed back. He was wrong. She had resources, she had knowledge, and she had something he'd never been able to sit still long enough to develop. Patience. She drove to a motel in Meridian that afternoon and paid 2 nights in cash. No drama, no calls to family, just a room with a deadbolt she could trust and enough quiet to think clearly. In her purse she kept a small notebook, prayers, phone numbers, reminders to herself, a recipe for Leonard's favorite sweet potato casserole. In the back, she found a note she'd written to herself the day the settlement cleared. She'd forgotten about it until now. Don't let money make you loud. Let it make you quiet. Let it buy you time. She read it twice. Then she smiled, the kind of smile that doesn't need anyone watching. Jordan thought he had kicked her out. What he had actually done was hand her the freedom to move without anyone watching. But freedom isn't the same thing as comfort, and there were still fires ahead before she came out the other side. The first time Jordan put a stack of documents in front of her, it was a Sunday. Margaret was at the kitchen table folding dish towels, half listening to the oven tick as a sweet potato pie finished up. Her knees had been bothering her all morning. Rain coming, she could feel it, but she was moving through it the way she always had. Jordan came in without calling ahead. She smiled and told herself maybe he just missed her. He was wearing one of those slim-cut dress shirts that seemed tailored for someone else's frame. Brittany drifted in behind him, barely lifting her eyes from her phone. "Hey, Mama." A quick half hug. "We brought some documents. Nothing major, just some back-end stuff for the house. Tax-related. Keeping things tidy." Margaret set down the dish towel. "What kind of documents?" Jordan produced a manila folder with the easy gesture of someone who had rehearsed it. Transfer paperwork. A real estate document. Something about power of attorney. He spoke quickly and reassuringly, layering in phrases like, "totally standard," and "already reviewed," and "Brittany's firm handles this all the time." Brittany offered a brief glance over the top of her phone. "It's just asset protection, Miss Carter. Keeps the house out of probate. You'd be fully covered." "I didn't ask to avoid anything," Margaret said, her voice measured. Jordan chuckled softly, the way he used to when he wanted to steer a conversation. "I know. That's why we're doing it for you. If something happens to you, God forbid, and your name is the only one on everything, it becomes a mess for the family to untangle. This just makes sure everything stays where it belongs." Margaret looked at the papers. The text swam slightly. She hadn't brought her reading glasses downstairs. Jordan noticed. "Here." He set a pen on top of the folder. "I've already highlighted where you need to sign. The rest is just language. You don't need to worry about any of it." She hesitated. Something in her chest said slow down. Something that sounded like her own voice from a long time ago, the voice that had learned to pay attention when things moved too fast. She wanted to say she'd like someone else to look it over first. She wanted to ask why he needed power of attorney while she was still perfectly capable of managing her own affairs. But this was Jordan. Her Jordan. The little boy who had clung to her hospital scrubs on a Tuesday night and refused to let go. The one who needed his inhaler whenever he got too worked up. The one who cried when she walked past his crib at night. The one who got chickenpox at 6 and wouldn't sleep unless she was holding his hand. She signed, page after page. Jordan made a small joke as she worked through the last page. She laughed. Just once, just a quick breath of sound. The timer on the oven went off. She got up to pull the pie out. And that was that. That moment stayed with her for weeks afterward. The smell of cinnamon drifting through the kitchen. The sound of the pen cap clicking shut. The particular look on Brittany's face as she put her phone away. Satisfied, but in a way that moved just slightly too fast. The visits after that grew shorter. Jordan started bringing people she didn't know, men who talked about square footage and market value and equity timelines. He began calling her Margaret in front of company, where he'd always said Mama before. She noticed but didn't say anything. One afternoon, while she was watering the begonias along the front walk, she overheard Brittany on the phone. Once we close on this place, we can finally move forward with Dallas. That evening, Margaret went upstairs and packed a small bag. Nothing dramatic. Just the things that mattered. Her Bible. Her passport. The last photograph she had of her and Leonard, taken on their anniversary the year before he got sick. Her notebook with the account information she'd never shared with anyone. She folded 2 dresses and tucked in her sneakers and placed the bag in the back of the closet. Just in case. Her body had slowed some over the years. But her mind was still as sharp as it had always been. Sharp enough to know when something had gone sour, even if she couldn't yet name exactly what it was. The day Jordan called her a guest in her own home, Margaret didn't raise her voice once. It was a Wednesday just after lunch. She had been vacuuming the living room, a chore she'd always preferred to do herself, and she wasn't about to stop because the situation around her had become uncomfortable. Jordan walked in with his sunglasses still pushed up on his face, earbuds looped around his neck, moving through the front hall like he was walking through a hotel lobby. Brittany was behind him in the middle of a Bluetooth call, not acknowledging anyone. They passed right by Margaret without speaking. Then Jordan stopped, turned around, and said in the casual, unhurried tone of someone making a minor request, "Hey, when you're done with the Dyson, can you empty the canister? We've got people coming through this weekend to look at the space." Margaret turned off the vacuum. People? What kind of people? Just real estate folks. Getting a sense of the current market value. Research, basically. She looked at him steadily. "You're selling this house?" He shook his head with a small, patient smile. "Not selling it. Just exploring what's out there. Keeping all our options open." She straightened. "Our options." And that was when he said it. Casually. Like it was simply the obvious thing to acknowledge. "You're a guest here now, Mama. It's still your space, don't take it the wrong way. I just mean, legally speaking, things are different now. You understand how it is." Her hand tightened around the vacuum handle. She didn't respond. She didn't let her face move. She nodded once, slowly, and he moved on down the hallway. That night she took her bag out of the closet. There was no reason to leave it there any longer. She didn't make an announcement. Jordan didn't ask where she was going. Brittany was in another room, already focused on something else. They had what they wanted, or so they believed. Margaret checked into a budget motel near a truck stop on the eastern edge of town. The mattress had some age to it and the heating unit made a sound like it was working twice as hard as it needed to. But the room was hers and it was quiet. She sat down at the small desk by the window and opened her notebook. There was a number in the back she'd held onto for a long time. A woman named Gloria, who ran a nonprofit that helped older women navigate housing law and tenants' rights. Margaret had called her years ago over a dispute with a rental property. She dialed. The line was disconnected. She sat with that for a moment. Then she thought of Clarence. Clarence Bell, CB to the people who knew him well, had been Leonard's closest friend since before Margaret entered the picture. Retired attorney, mid-70s, white-haired, The kind of man who moved slowly but thought fast and whose face, when he was listening, gave nothing away. She hadn't spoken to him in nearly 2 years. She picked up her phone anyway. It rang 6 times. Then a low, graveled voice. "This better be the Lord or a lawsuit." Margaret felt the first real smile she'd had in days. "Maybe it's both." A pause. Then, warmly, with recognition, "Margaret." "Yeah, CB. It's me. I need to talk." He didn't need convincing. Real friends don't. He remembered who brought the food when his back went out and he couldn't get to the grocery store for 3 weeks. He'd been the kind of friend who showed up, and he still was. CB met her at a diner just off the interstate the next morning. The kind of place where the coffee comes in thick ceramic mugs and nobody rushes you out and the waitress calls everyone Han without irony, whether you're 8 years old or 85. He looked older than the last time she'd seen him. His beard had gone fully white. His eyes were a little slower to focus. But when he settled into the booth across from her, the sharpness behind those eyes was exactly the same. "You look like you've been through something," he said. "Good morning to you too," Margaret replied. He took a long sip of his black coffee. No cream, no sugar, Leonard's habit. She noticed and felt the familiar small ache of it. "All right," he said, setting the mug down. "Tell me all of it. Don't soften anything." So she did. The documents on the kitchen table. The day she couldn't get into her own home. The changed locks. What Brittany said. What Jordan said. The realtor visits, the guest comment, the way his voice had shifted when he talked about the house. The way he said "our options" like she wasn't standing right in front of him. CB listened without asking a single question until she was done. Then he leaned back, let out a long, considered breath and said, "He played you. And he made one serious mistake while doing it." "What's that?" "He forgot who raised him." Margaret looked down at the table. "I signed the deed, CB. My name is on those papers. Your name is on those papers under what appears to be false pretenses. That's a different thing. Signing a document after someone has misrepresented its contents to you, that's not a binding transaction. That's fraud." She looked at him. "You think a judge would see it that way?" The corner of his mouth lifted. "I think I could present that argument in my sleep. And I know exactly who to bring in to do it right." She almost laughed, but the weight of it sat too heavy for a full laugh. "I'm not trying to ruin him, CB. I'm not interested in destroying what's left of whatever we had. I just want my home back. I just want to be able to look at myself in a mirror and not feel like I handed everything over to someone who never intended to honor any of it." He nodded slowly. "Then we don't destroy him. We educate him." They spent the next 2 hours going through everything. The dates, the documents, what she remembered being told, and what she actually signed. Margaret had written most of it down in her notebook already, before she ever thought she'd need it. Old nursing habit. Document everything. CB told her what the legal process would look like, which attorney he had in mind to bring the petition forward, and what would happen if the case went to a full hearing. Then Margaret said something she had not said out loud to another living person. "I need you to know something, CB. I have money." He glanced up. "Some savings. $9.5 million. Settlement from the hospital after Leonard died. I never touched it. Never told Jordan. Didn't tell anyone." CB went very still. He set down his mug. "Margaret, I didn't want money to be the reason people treated me a certain way," she said, her voice barely above the noise of the diner around them. "I didn't want Jordan to look at me differently. I didn't want any of it to change the way I loved him." CB stared at her for a long moment. Then he reached across the table and rested his hand over hers. "It didn't change the way you loved him," he said. "He changed all on his own." Margaret turned to the window and watched the trucks moving on the highway in the distance. Her reflection was there in the glass, overlaid against the moving world. She looked older than she felt, tired in places that rest couldn't touch, but not broken. Cracked, maybe, the way old wood gets when the weather changes, but still holding. She turned back to CB. "I want to do this the right way. No spectacle. No headlines. I just want my name back on that door." "We'll get it," he said. "But before the lawyers and the hearings and the filings, There was one more conversation Margaret needed to have. Not with the man Jordan had become. With whatever was left of the boy she remembered. She didn't call first. She knew what would happen if she did. He'd let Brittany handle it, or he simply wouldn't pick up. So she drove over in the early afternoon on a day she knew Brittany was working. The front yard looked like it had been prepped for a showing. The hedges were trimmed to a careful, impersonal neatness. Her begonias were gone. Pulled up, replaced with something lower maintenance. She walked to the door and knocked once. Jordan answered in athletic shorts and a branded hoodie, holding a protein shake, his face cycling through several expressions in the span of 2 seconds when he saw her standing there. "Mama, Margaret, what are you doing here?" I don't need much of your time." Her voice was calm. "I just came to say something. You can say whatever you want after, but let me finish first." He looked behind him out of habit, checking, she figured, whether Brittany's car was in the drive. Then he stepped out onto the porch and let the screen door close between them. Margaret straightened her shoulders. "I raised you when nobody else was willing to. Not because the state required it. Not because I was looking for credit. I did it because I looked at a child who needed someone, and I decided to be that person. I gave you everything I had. I gave you time I didn't have extra of, money I had to budget for, sleep I couldn't afford to lose. I sat with you through fevers and nightmares and every hard thing childhood put in front of you. I never once let you feel like a burden. I never once made you feel like you were less than anyone else's child. And I never, not one time, made you feel like a guest in the life I built for you." Jordan's jaw worked, but he didn't speak. "You repaid all of that with a signature and a changed lock." She let that sit for a moment. "I'm not here to argue. I'm not here to make you feel guilty. I'm here because I wanted to look you in the face and say this to you directly, the way I was raised to do things." She took a breath. "I need you to know that I am not destitute. I never was. I have more than enough money to purchase this property outright and have significant funds remaining. I didn't tell you that because love isn't a negotiation, and I didn't need you treating me like an investment. But now you need to know." Something moved across Jordan's face. The protein shake lowered. "I didn't know that. You weren't supposed to." Her voice stayed even. "I've already spoken with an attorney. This will go where it needs to go. I came here today because I wanted to say what I had to say to you before that process begins. Not through lawyers. Face to face. You're going to take me to court?" His voice was smaller than she'd heard it since he was a boy. "I'm going to reclaim what's mine," Margaret said. "And I'm going to do it in a way that means something. What you need to understand is what a real home costs, not in dollars. In sacrifice. In years. In love that asked nothing back." She held his gaze for another moment. Then she turned, walked down the steps, got in her car, and drove away. No tears. No raised voices. Just a woman who had finished saying what needed to be said. 3 months later, the house was vacant. The furniture was gone, the rooms empty, the yard quiet. The woman who purchased it, a retired school librarian from Lafayette, Louisiana, named Patricia, mentioned to the realtor that the place felt heavy when she first walked through it, like the walls had been holding something in. She wasn't wrong. CB had moved efficiently. The fraud petition worked its way through the court with less resistance than either of them expected. The judge reviewed the documentation, heard the testimony, and ruled that the transfer had taken place under circumstances that were misleading at best and manipulative by any reasonable interpretation. The original deed transfer was voided. Jordan didn't appear at the hearing. He had already left the state before the filing was served. Brittany had returned to Dallas sometime earlier. By all accounts, they were no longer together. Margaret didn't celebrate when she heard any of this. She didn't feel the victory the way she might have imagined she would. She just exhaled. A long, slow release. The kind that comes when something that has been braced inside you for months finally lets go. She didn't move back into the house. She thought about it, briefly, but every room held something she wasn't ready to sit with. Sunday mornings in the kitchen. The smell of cornbread and rain. The version of Jordan who used to hug her at the door before she knew what he had been planning. Some places hold too much to return to. She sold the property through an estate attorney, put the proceeds into the trust, and kept moving forward. What she did next, nobody anticipated. She used a portion of her settlement funds, carefully, quietly, through an attorney she trusted, to purchase 3 small homes in Pascagoula, Mississippi. Modest houses on a quiet street, nothing flashy. She had them cleaned and furnished and inspected, and she drew up a program to provide stable housing for women over 60 who had been evicted, displaced, or pushed out by their own families. She named it Len's Place after Leonard. She said it was the kind of thing he would have done himself if he'd had the time. The first resident was a woman named Alma, 73 years old, put out by her adult grandson after she could no longer watch his children full-time. The second was a woman named Darlene, whose daughter had sold her house while she was in a rehabilitation facility recovering from hip surgery. Every Sunday, Margaret cooked roast chicken, collard greens, sweet potato pie when the season was right. The women would gather in the kitchen or on the back porch, and the conversation moved the way conversation does between people who have been through serious things. Slowly, with pauses, and with a particular kind of honesty that only comes from having lost something you thought was permanent. Margaret never explained her own story in detail. They saw it in how she carried herself, in the way she looked at a locked door and didn't flinch, in the steadiness of her hands when she was busy in a kitchen, and in the stillness of her face when someone else was talking about pain she recognized completely. CB stopped by every few weeks to help with the paperwork side of things, the legal filings and nonprofit documentation, and the occasional dispute that needed a firm hand. He joked about putting her photograph on a highway billboard somewhere. The woman who turned betrayal into something that would outlast her. Margaret would wave him off. I just did what my mother taught me to do. When somebody corners you, you don't fall apart. You take a breath, you find your footing, and you figure out what you're building next. But she knew, quietly, that the fight had never really been about the house. It had been about refusing to let one act of betrayal, even one this large, become the final word on the life she had built with her own hands. The house was just the battlefield. The outcome was never really about property. About a year after everything had settled, Margaret was sitting on the back porch of Len's Place with a cup of chamomile tea and a fleece blanket across her lap. The evening sky had gone full orange and gold, the kind of sunset that makes silence feel deliberate, like something that was arranged on purpose. Upstairs, Alma was crocheting. She could hear the faint creak of the rocking chair. Downstairs in the kitchen, Darlene was humming to herself while she washed greens at the sink. Something old, a hymn maybe, or a song that had outlasted whatever it was about. Margaret sat with her tea and let herself be still. A letter had arrived that morning. No return address. Just her name in handwriting she recognized the moment she saw it on the envelope, though she hadn't seen it written on anything in almost a year. She opened it in her bedroom before coming outside. Inside was a single handwritten page. I made a mistake. I know that now. I've known it for a while, if I'm being honest. I don't fully understand why I did it the way I did. Maybe I thought I was owed something. Maybe I convinced myself I was thinking practically and that made it okay. It didn't make it okay. You gave me everything a person could give, and I took advantage of the fact that you trusted me. I don't expect anything from this letter. I don't expect forgiveness, and I'm not asking for it. I just needed you to know that I see what I did. And you didn't deserve any of it. I hope you're somewhere good. Jordan. She read it twice. Then she folded it along its original creases and placed it carefully in the back of her Bible. Not to forget it. Not to punish it. Just to keep it where things went that needed to be held but not dwelt upon. She didn't write back. She didn't need to. Forgiveness, the way Margaret understood it, wasn't about restoring something that had been broken or releasing someone from accountability. It was about setting down the weight of it yourself so that you could continue walking without being bent by what someone else had done to you. She sat on the porch and let herself understand something she was still working through. You can love a person completely, raise them with everything you have, offer them every good thing you know how to give, and still lose them. Not because of who you were. Because of choices they made that had nothing to do with you. That truth is not yours to carry. The crickets picked up their rhythm as the sky darkened. Margaret closed her eyes and breathed in deep, unhurried, The kind of breath that fills more than just the lungs. A breath that moves through memory, through grief, through every year behind you, and finds something quiet at the center of all of it. A home is not a roof or a deed or a lock that turns when you expect it to. A home is what you make with the people who show up for you, who eat at your table, who let you sit beside them in the evening when the day is done. Margaret had lost one home, and built another from the ground up with her own hands. No paperwork required. If the story moved something in you, if it brought someone to mind, someone you've loved, lost, or let go, share it with a person who needs to hear it today. And remember this, real love cannot be stolen. Real strength doesn't announce itself. It just quietly builds again. This has been Black Voices Louder. We'll see you in the next one.